Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience, and I'm here tonight with my full review of the Audio GD R-8 Mkii DAC. This is the 2021 version. This was loaned to me for review by Underwood Hi-Fi. They are a US company and they are headquartered in Hawaii. The current price of this unit through Underwood Hi-Fi is $19.99. That would be in US dollars. If you go directly through Audio GD, which means ordering it from China and paying a whole lot more for shipping, it is a little bit cheaper at $17.80. But once again, I did order my Master 9 amp from them, and that was 3.5 years ago, and the shipping was something like $130 on that, so I'm sure it's even higher now. It's a big and heavy package, so another advantage to buying it through Underwood, and they are an authorized Audio GD dealer, and they have a service center facility in Georgia, and I guess they offer a 2-year warranty on Audio GD products through and will repair them through their Georgia service facility. So anyway, this is a digital to analog converter. It's an R2R type of resistor ladder DAC. Does not use Delta Sigma chips. I can't tell you exactly how an R2R DAC works, but it's a completely different principle. It's older technology. It's been around for a long time, but R2R DACs are pretty popular right now. A lot of companies are going to R2R DACs, and a lot of people in the Headphone Experience, my headphone group, are talking about R2R DACs lately, and a lot of them prefer them to the standard Delta Sigma type DACs. But anyway, sorry I'm not going to be able to hold this DAC up and spin it around and show it to you like I usually do. You can see a picture of it behind me on the screen. It would be the bottom unit in the picture. The top is the Master 9 headphone amp, and they are kind of made for each other, kind of a matched pair, and I've got them matched up right now. But anyway, it's because of the size of this thing that I can't hold it up and show it to you, so what I'm going to do is I'm shooting this video in 3 parts. The first part, which we're in right now, will run through the specifications. The second part, we'll give you a close-up view of the amp and show you how to run through the controls. And I'm still a little bit confused. When I first got this 3 months ago, I had the selection buttons and all that figured out pretty well. Well, I didn't use them for a while. I set it how I liked it and left it. And now when I go back to the Audio GD website, I think they changed the instructions because they have the manual on there. The unit didn't actually come with the manual, but you can go on the Audio GD website. And for some reason, my unit isn't doing exactly what the manual online says it should, so I'm thinking maybe they made some updates, and maybe, because mine, I don't know, I've had it for 3 months now, but it was the latest model at that time, so I'm not sure. But anyway, so the second part of this video will be that close-up view and run through the controls. And then the third part will be me back here telling you what I think about the sound of this unit and comparing it to a few other DACs. So anyway, this unit has 6 digital inputs, and that would be coax, optical, USB, BNC, which is basically just coax with a different connector on it. You can get a little adapter for like $3. Then AES, which is basically a 3-pin full-size XLR plug. And then IIS, which looks like a HDMI plug, but it's not for HDMI. It doesn't work the same way, so you can't take your Blu-ray player and run an HDMI cable to the input of this unit. It doesn't work that way. This IIS is a different system with a different layout, and you would have to have a source with IIS running, which would be like some sort of server, streamer, something running to this unit. And then I guess there's no standardized wiring layout with that. So I think you can actually change that in the settings on this and make it match up. So anyway, and then there's also, I guess I already mentioned AES. That would be your 3-pin XLR. This unit accepts signals up to PCM signals up to 32 bits and 384 kilohertz, and DSD signals up to 512. This unit also has 3 analog outputs. The first would be RCA jacks, which are single-ended. And then you have 3-pin XLR balanced outputs on this. And you also have what's called ACSS, which is basically a 3-pin mini XLR plug. And that is made to run between Audio GD products. And the Audio GD Master 9 sitting on the top also has ACSS pins or inputs, and when I did my first impressions video I didn't yet have cables to use that, but shortly afterwards I did, and I've been using this for a couple months now, using the ACSS output from the DAC to the ACSS input of the Master 9, and I will talk about that when I get to the sound part of this. Anyway, the total harmonic distortion is rated at 0.01%, and the signal to noise ratio is rated at 120 decibels. The size of this unit, and it's just about the same size as the Master 9. It's a full 17 inches wide. It's 17.5 inches deep. It's actually about a ½ inch deeper than the Master 9 that's sitting on top of it, and it's about 3.5 inches tall. And the weight of this unit is 26.5 pounds, which actually is a little bit lighter than the Master 9. The Master 9 comes in at about 32 pounds, but I have the Master 9 on top because it is a Class A amp and puts off quite a bit of heat, so I figured it's better to put it on top. This DAC also has a choice of 4 oversampling settings. You can go with no oversampling, which would be 0 on the screen, or you can go with 2 times, 4 times, or 8 times oversampling, and I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to the sound, but I kind of settled in at 8 times oversampling. I thought I got the most detail that way, and the most precise imaging and the sound stage. It just not a whole lot of difference in the sound. The lower settings actually give you a little bit of a warmer, little smoother sound, where the higher settings up at 8 times gives you a little bit more of an analytical and a little more detailed sound. Anyway, I will be back after this little break here, which will show you the controls and a close-up of it, and then I will be back and talk about the sound and the different decks that I compared this to. Okay, I'm going to try to show you how the controls on this unit works, but to be honest, I haven't changed anything in a couple of months. I did have this figured out when I did my first impressions video, but in the meantime forgot, and it looks like the instructions on Audio GD's website have changed because this doesn't seem to work the way the instructions say it should. So I'm guessing the instructions have been updated, and this is a 2021 model, the Mkii, but I don't know if there's something newer. But anyway, I'm having problems figuring this out, but I'll explain it the best I can and see if we can figure this out. Anyway, the first number here, the number 3, that is the number of the input we are on, and you can switch through the 6 inputs with this button here. And 4 is optical, 5 is IIS, 6 is USB, 1 is AES, 2 is BNC, and 3 is RCA, which is actually your coax input, and that's what I'm using right now. Then the P is showing that there's a PM or a PCM signal coming in, and that would be 44.1 kilohertz right now, which is CD quality. That's what I've got coming in. I'm using a CD transport coming into this. Now, this is the hard part, trying to figure this out, and this is kind of complicated, and the instructions don't help at all. So anyway, as far as I can figure out, this first number here lets you know if you are in oversampling or if you are in non-oversampling. If it's a 0, you're in oversampling. If it's an N, you're not. Then the second number here, and it only lasts for 5 seconds. The second number here, which is an 8, means it's currently set to 8 times oversampling. You have a choice of 0, 2 times, 4 times, or 8 times. And I've been using it mostly on the 8. That seems to give the most detail and the largest sound stage. So to switch that, I believe, first of all, you have to hit this button. That'll switch this over to this digit. Then you can, well, no, I messed up. Switch over here. Then with this button, you can cycle through either 0 oversampling 2 times, 4 times, or 8 times. And then you can go over here and you can select N, which is no oversampling. N1 would be your no oversampling mode, or back to 0.8, which would be 8 times oversampling. And then I believe you can jump over here. Well, that here, this is N, or your other choice is A, and that would be your auto dimming on the display here. If you have it on A, after I think 15 seconds, everything goes off except for 1 dash in the middle. And then what else? What else does this do? Here we go. We can flip through these again. As far as I know, it was showing in the instructions that the auto dimming was over in the 5th position, but that doesn't seem to be the way it works here. So, well, now I got it messed up again here. Now I'm going through the different inputs on this button, which I'm not sure how that happened. So let's see where we're at now. So, oh, and then this position here, you have a selection of either N or 5. And it's not a 5, actually, it's an S, which means simulates turntable sound, which is supposed to give it a slightly warmer, sort of a turntable sound, but I haven't used that. I think I did try it in the beginning. I think I preferred it without it. So anyway, let's see how we've got this set. So I think I've got everything back to normal. It's at 8 times oversampling and no simulation of a turntable. So anyway, sorry I couldn't give you a better example of how this thing works, but to be honest, it's pretty confusing. So I just pretty much leave it set where it's at 8 times oversampling, and my input is usually 3. I've used a couple of other inputs, but that's where we're at right now. So anyway, back to the main part of the video. Hi, I'm back with part 3 of my video, and this is where I actually talk about the sound. First, I wanted to list the equipment I used reviewing this DAC. And to start with, my clean power was provided by Core Power Technologies, a two-piece power conditioner. My source was a Cambridge Audio 540C CD player used as a transport only. And I used four different headphone amps testing this DAC. That would be the Audio GD Master 9, which you can see in the picture behind me, along with the R-8 DAC. And then the Felix Audio Echo, which is an OTL Type 2 amp, the Waveborn Edelweiss 3, which is also an OTL Type 2 amp, and the Burson Conductor 3 reference, which is a combination DAC and amp, but can be used as a standalone DAC, or it has analog input, so you can run another DAC or another source into it. The headphones I used in testing this DAC were the Hi-Fi Man Sundara, the Hi-Fi Man Aria, and that would be the V3 stealth version, the LSA HP2, and the Kennerton Odin, and the Kennerton Thror. Some comparison DACs I used in my review would be the iFi Audio IDSD Neo, the DAC part of the Burson Conductor 3 reference, the Topping E30, and the Topping D70 MQA version. That would be the D70S MQA version, and the Benchmark DAC 1, which has been my sort of reference DAC for since I started doing reviews. So I'll kind of go through the DACs one at a time and give you a comparison of how I think the sound of that DAC compares to the R8. And I'm going to start with the iFi Audio IDSD, which I actually didn't overlap. I think that I sent that back before I got this DAC, so I'm kind of going by memory on this one. The others, the rest of these, I actually was able to compare directly side by side, switch back and forth. The iFi, I think I sent out a couple weeks before I got the R8 in. So based on memory, what I could remember of the iFi, both DACs have a very open, very wide, and very three-dimensional kind of holographic sound to them. But the iFi sounds a little bit thinner, is a little bit less dynamic, a little bit less punch to the sound, and a little more, I would say, dry or sterile. Both have excellent detail, and I really do like the iFi DAC. It's great. It's just that the R8 just has a little more body to it, a little more weight to the sound. Comparing the R8 to the Benchmark DAC 1, like I said, that's been my reference DAC for a long time. Both have very good detail. They're both solid. They've got some weight to them. They're both slightly on the warm side of neutral. They're both very smooth. But I would say that the R8 compared to the Benchmark has a little bit more width to the soundstage, a little more depth to the soundstage, and is a little more three-dimensional. Comparing the R8 to the Burson Conductor 3 reference, and that would be the DAC part of it, I actually ran the R8 into one of the analog inputs of the Burson and compared it to the internal DAC. And I would say that the Burson actually had a little, well, first of all, they were both had very good detail, both of them. But the Burson, I would say, was just a little bit warmer and had a little bit bassier and had a little bit more weight and a little bit more punch to the sound. But the Burson, without a doubt, didn't have quite the width. The R-8 definitely had more width to the soundstage and more depth and a more three-dimensional sound to it. Of all these DACs here, I would say that the Burson was probably the warmest, bassiest, and punchiest of the bunch, but it probably had the smallest soundstage of the bunch. But I do have a theory, and I'm not sure if other people agree with this or not, but I have a theory that dynamics has a lot to do with soundstage, that if a headphone or amp or even a DAC, the more dynamic it is, I think that that kind of shrinks the soundstage. And I've seen that with headphones, especially. Two of the most dynamic headphones that I've heard that really have a lot of punch and slam to the bass would be the original Kennerton Valley and the new Hi-Fi Man Aria Stealth version, which everyone has probably heard by now. The new V3 Aria has a much narrower soundstage than it did, but it is much more dynamic and a lot punchier than the old one. And I think that may be the reason for the loss in the soundstage width. Same with the Kennerton, the original Valley. Very punchy, very dynamic, but not a real large soundstage. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the reason for the Burson Conductor not having quite the soundstage width as some of these other DACs, because it seems to be a little more dynamic, a little more punchy. But anyway, then comparing the topping E30, and that's only a $150 DAC, by far the cheapest of this bunch. The iFi, I believe, goes for $799. The benchmark is no longer made, but that went for $1,000 when it was sold. But it's a combination DAC and headphone amp. Burson Conductor 3 reference, I believe, goes for $1,750. And topping at only $150. It was my number one rating last year at my end of the year video for a Best Buy. I think it's an exceptional DAC for the money, $150. So I figured I'd throw that into the mix and see how it stood up. And to be honest, both the E30 and the R8 are very detailed, very clean. Both have a very wide and deep sound stage, and both have a very three-dimensional holographic sound. Where the E30 does lack a little bit, comparing it to the R8, is the topping E30 sounds a little thinner, a little more analytical, and I guess I would describe it as a drier, less liquid sound. But I mean, it's exceptional, but you know, if I have to take my pick, I'm going to take the R8. So the last DAC I wanted to compare to the R8 is, and I do want to mention, these are all Delta Sigma DACs. They all use Delta Sigma chips. This is the R8 is the only R2R resistor ladder DAC that I have right now. Well, except for the little power unit that goes on the Hi-Fi Man Diva, which actually is a amplifier DAC and and a power source for the Bluetooth use of the Diva, but I'm not getting into that. But anyway, but as far as comparing to actual standalone DACs, like I said, I have never done an R2R DAC before. These are all Delta Sigmas, and what really surprised me is the topping D70S, and that's the MQA version that I just did my final review on that about, I don't know, 5 days ago. A week ago, I don't remember. But anyway, I really like that DAC. And as far as measurements, the topping is one of the best measuring DACs around. And I'm going by the measurements of Audio Science Review, and I know not everyone agrees with their measurements. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way they're doing the measurements. I just think that you can't base a piece of equipment entirely on measurements, because I think most equipment now, that the distortion levels, the signal to noise ratio, that sort of thing, is probably beyond human hearing, so small differences in measurements shouldn't make that much difference in actual, what you're hearing. But that said, according to Audio Science Review, the topping D70S MQA version is one of the best measuring DACs that they've ever tested. Okay, on the other hand, the Audio GD R-8 is one of the worst measuring DACs they have ever tested. And I did want to point out, though, that R2R resistor ladder DACs almost always measure worse than delta sigma type DACs. That's just the way it is. The distortion, signal to noise ratio, all that is going to be better. The measurements will be better almost every case in a delta sigma type DAC. That being said, I was expecting, when I compared the topping D70 to the R8, I was expecting a very different sound. Well, to my surprise, of all these DACs, the topping D70S, I believe, in my opinion, sounds the closest to the R8 of any of these. In fact, it sounds so close that I believe if I did a blind test, I would have a hard time telling the two apart. I would have a hard time telling you which one was the topping D70, which one is the R8. And I can't figure that out. I don't know why two completely different measuring DACs would sound the most similar out of this bunch. I mean, to be honest, after I had them for a while, the topping D70, the one that sounded the most different from the topping would probably be the i5, and the Burson sounds a lot different. So what I'm trying to figure out is, why am I hearing a much larger difference between two delta sigma DACs? And some of them are even using the same DAC chips. I believe the topping and the Burson are using the same chips. Yet I hear a much larger difference between those DACs than I do between the topping D70 and the R8. And I realize the DAC chip isn't everything. I mean, input stages, processing stages, output stages of the DAC are all going to affect the sound. But, like I said, of all these, the one that sounds the most similar is the D70 by topping. Both that and the R8, they both have exceptional detail. They're exceptionally clean. They both have a very wide soundstage. They both have a lot of depth to the soundstage. They both have a very three-dimensional holographic sound. They're both just slightly warm, on the warm side of neutral. They both sound very smooth and very liquid. Maybe the people at topping, maybe they deliberately made the D70S to sound like an R2R DAC. Maybe that was their intention, because R2R DACs are very popular right now. So maybe they tried to do that. And if that's the case, they succeeded. So I did a lot of comparing, going back and forth between the D70 and the R8. And like I said, at times I had a hard time telling the two apart. But it seems like if I just jump back and forth, it was hard to tell the difference. But if I listened to it for a while, I started sensing it was more of a feeling than it was an actual something I could identify. And when it comes down to it, if I, listen to like a whole CD or something, by the time I'm done, I just feel a little more satisfaction after hearing it through the R-8 than I do through the topping. Excuse me a second. I just feel a little more of a sense of enjoyment listening with the R-8. When the only way I can really explain it is, to me, I think the R-8 just has a little bit more of a natural, sort of organic, maybe real is a good word. I just feel like it sounds more real through the R-8, where with the D70 it sounds a little bit more like a recording. I just feel like I'm a little bit more there and a little bit more just kind of, part of the music. I just feel like it surrounds me and makes me part of it just a little bit more. But like I said, it's a very small difference, and there's a very big price difference. The topping, you're looking at, I think, $650, and this R-8, you're looking at $2,000. The topping is about 1/6 the size and about 1/6 the weight of the R-8, and like I said, they sound very similar, but I just feel the R-8 is just a little more natural and real sounding, and I can't explain why. I feel that way when I listen to it, especially things like excuse me, like acoustic guitars, piano music, female voices. They just have a little bit more of a real sound to me, and I guess that's all I can say. That's all I can explain. But so anyway, but that's important to me, and I do like it. I mean, of all these DACs, I will be honest, the R-8 is my favorite right now. So anyway, I want to talk about a few other small issues. There are a couple things that I'm not entirely happy. I mean, yeah, I do recommend this DAC if you can afford it. It's not cheap. But I do have a couple issues, and I did want to mention, and this isn't a problem, this is just something I forgot to mention earlier, the ACSS connection. That would be the output from the DAC, and, the Master 9, also being Audio GD, also has the ACSS connection. I believe that all Audio GD equipment uses that. And my understanding of that is using that instead of the RCA or the XLR outputs. The ACSS is balanced like the XLR. It actually looks like a 3-pin mini XLR plug. But my understanding of how it differs from the standard XLR balanced outputs is it avoids the output stage of the DAC, which amplifies the sound, and then it avoids the input stage of the amplifier or the headphone amp, and basically just shortens the connection. It shortens the signal path, and it goes through a couple less processes. And I was told that it would sound better than even the balanced output. So it took me, I don't know, like a month, but I did round up some cables. I didn't have the proper cables, so I finally did hook up the ACSS. And I will admit, I think it does sound a little bit better. It sounds a little bit, just slightly more detailed, slightly cleaner. And I think that the sound stage, I think the imaging is slightly more precise, and I think the sound stage is slightly more three-dimensional. And I don't think the cables really have anything to do with it. I think what it is like I said, it's avoiding, you know, circuitry in both units, and it's more of a direct path. So I did try it out. It does seem to make a little bit of an improvement. I did notice right away, this DAC has 3 sets of outputs. And I didn't know this until I tried the ACSS, because prior to that I was using the XLR into the Master 9, and then I was using the RCA outputs into one of the other 3 amps, either the Felix Audio, the Waveborn, or the Burson, and I could use them both at the same time. Okay, so I assumed once I got the ACSS cables that I could use all 3 at the same time. Well, I hooked up the ACSS to the Master 9, and then found out that the balance cables, or the XLR cables, no longer worked. They didn't have an output, and the RCA didn't either. So apparently with the R-8, if you're using the ACSS output, you no longer are able to use the XLR balanced output or the RCA single output, and that's just the way it's wired. It shuts those down. So if you are using the ACS, you only have one output, which that is kind of a disappointment to me. I wish you could use all 3 at the same time, and I could use this DAC to, you know, as a source to 3 different amps, but apparently it doesn't work that way. Hang on just a second. Something else that I realized was when I'm using ACSS, the gain control on the Master 9 doesn't work. I don't have an option of high or low gain. I don't know if it's in between the two or if it's just in high gain, but it doesn't say high gain, it says low gain, but I think it's at a higher level than before. But you only have one gain setting, and it's fine for any of the headphones I'm using, but it's possible a real sensitive IEM or something, the gain might be too high, and you might pick up a little bit of background hiss. I don't think it's high enough you're going to hear it. I tried it with my Sony MDR V700, which is as sensitive as any IEM out there, and I couldn't hear any background noise, so I don't think it's an issue. One other issue I have is you could see when I was using the controls going through the settings, it's kind of confusing. It's kind of complicated. I guess like 3 months ago when I first got this, I had it figured out pretty well, and I could go through and set everything, but I didn't use it for a while, and I went back and looked at the directions, and the directions given by Audio GD on their website don't seem to match up with this amp or this DAC now. It's not doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's slightly different, so it was confusing. I did have a little bit of a problem with it. As far as this DAC, like I said, I really recommend it. It does have one flaw in one category. It does come in last place of all these. All of these, the i-Fi, the Benchmark, the Burson, the Topping E30, the Topping D70, they all have a slightly lower noise floor than the R-8. The R-8, if I plug any of the other of these into the Master 9 and plug the R-8 into the Master 9, go back and forth, the noise floor is a little bit higher on the R-8. For an example, you know, doesn't matter what headphone I'm using, it's just, you know, I'm just picking out a number. Say I'm using the Hi-Fi Manoria, and with the R-8, I start hearing noise with the volume. With my source pause, I'll pick up a little bit of hiss if I turn the volume up to 60, where with the topping D70 I got to turn it up to like 70. But neither one really matters because I'm listening to that headphone with the volume at 30, way, way, way below where I'd pick up any noise. The only time that would have any effect is, once again, using a super sensitive headphone or an IEM maybe. That could make a difference. But so that is the one weak point of this DAC compared to the others. The noise floor is slightly higher, but it's still far below the threshold of where I'm going to pick it up with any normal headphones. So once again, probably only an issue if you're going to be using IEMs, but using, an amp capable of putting out 9 watts per channel into, I don't remember if it's 32 or 40 ohms, something like that. Huge, powerful amp. Is an amp like that really the right amp for IEMs to start with? So, you make the call. The only other drawbacks is the thing is huge. The R-8 is 17 inches square by 3 inches high. It weighs 26.5 pounds. You have to have a shelf at least 20 inches deep to use this DAC. That's because the unit itself is 17 inches and you've got to have like 3 inches behind it for your cables to come out the back of it, because you don't want to have it cramped up and, put a sharp end in your cables. So allowing like 3 inches behind it, you now need like a 20-inch deep shelf. Well, my wire shelves, you can see in the picture here, were only 18 inches, so I actually had to put a spacer behind the shelf to give room for the wire. And I've heard that as a complaint about audio GD equipment, about the depth being so deep that people couldn't fit it on their shelves. So that can be an issue. The weight at like 26 pounds is, that's pretty heavy for a DAC, but if you're not going to move it around and stuff, that's probably not an issue. So bottom line, yeah, I love this DAC. I love the way it sounds. I've compared it to half a dozen other good DACs, and I actually like it the best. Do I recommend it? If you have the room, if you have another audio GD piece of equipment like the DAC 9 or something, or the Master 9, it's not cheap, but it's a great DAC, and I would pick it over any of these others. So yeah, I'm really enjoying my time with it. I'm hoping maybe I will be able to purchase this and keep it. We'll see what happens. So yeah, it's not the right DAC for everyone, but if you're looking for an R2R DAC, and basically what I've come up with is, like I said, this is my first R2R DAC review. It's to me, it's kind of like a tube amp. A couple of years ago, I hadn't heard any tube amps yet. So I didn't know what to expect, and I was expecting a large difference between that and a solid state amp. When I listened to them, at first I didn't hear that huge difference, but after listening for a while, I realized that tube sound was kind of addicting. Tubes never measure as well as a solid state amp, but many people prefer the sound. They just, for some reason, like the sound of tubes better. Is it the holographic, three-dimensional sound? Is it the warmth? Is it the smoothness? I don't know. But a lot of people prefer tubes over solid state, even though it doesn't measure as well. Well, I would say the same about this DAC. It doesn't measure as well as any of these other DACs, even compared to the topping E30 at $150, but I just like the way it sounds. It just has a natural, organic sound to it, and when I'm sitting there listening to it, my enjoyment level is just a little bit higher, and like I said, it's hard to pinpoint and describe the difference, but I know that I like it. So yeah, for the right person, this is a great DAC, and I recommend it. So I'm going to wrap this up now. This is getting to be a pretty long video, and once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please join us over at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. We are real close, or maybe reached 14,000 members today, so we just keep growing over there. You're all welcome, and once again, thanks for watching my video.